Well, we have kind of a transitional reading today. We're in the 16th chapter of Acts, and we're looking at verses 11 through 15. But one thing to look at, even in the transitions, and maybe it's a little bit more than that, but even in the transitions, one of the things that you will see is this vision. The vision, I mean that in the business sense. They want to bring the message of the gospel and understand what they are actually doing. We call it evangelization, preaching the gospel. That actually really comes from the original Greek. But what they're actually doing is spreading a whole new understanding of who we are as human beings. That's what they're actually doing. And this is why I think we may have lost that in the current time because, and the Pope is kind of touching on this, you have people who are focusing just on morality. Well, people were living moral lives back then, some, depending on their concept of morality. But one of the interesting things that I think it was Fulton Sheen had said is that many people, now this is back in the 60s, maybe 70s, and maybe even the 50s, many people would say that our culture was turning pagan. And he said that's actually an insult to pagans because they lived a very moral life. So to assume that they're going out and preaching nothing but morality is missing the whole point because especially they're obviously in the Roman Empire, but they're in areas greatly affected by Greek philosophy. And they are teaching not a morality, but an anthropology, a spiritual reality, because what they are teaching is a deeper understanding of who we are as human beings. Kind of look at it this way. The atheist, remember, there's a difference between an agnostic and an atheist. An atheist will tell you there is no God, period. Have yourself a good day. You obviously, because of what I do for a living, I don't accept that. But I also don't accept that logically, because what that says is I've looked at all of reality. I haven't seen God, therefore God doesn't exist. Whereas the reality is, if we believe in evolution, which I do, then you can't say I've looked at all of reality because you don't know you have the capability of doing that, you see. And that is literally the scientific basis on which faith is. Faith exists with the understanding that there is a reality bigger than our ability to perceive it. So that's why I'm not an atheist. But there's the agnostic. The agnostic basically says, well, I'm not sure if God exists. And I really think the other part of the agnostic is I have too many important things to do than to worry about whether or not God exists. I think that is the source of agnosticism. But we are people of faith, and we have to understand it within the concept of what they were actually preaching at the time. They weren't just preaching morality. They were preaching a deeper understanding of what it means to be a human being. And this is what they're teaching. And so we see the story of someone named, and that's literally how she's described, someone named Lydia. You could say it, a woman named Lydia, but it wasn't, well, the mayor of the town. No, it was a woman named Lydia. Let's look over the reading and see what we have here. And sailing from Troas, we're in chapter 16, 11, and following, and remember we were in the Catholic public domain version. And sailing from Troas, taking a direct path, we arrived at Samothrace, I may have mispronounced that, and on the following day at Neapolis. And from there to Philippi, which is the preeminent city in the area of Macedonia. Now they had originally received in a dream a message to go to Macedonia, a colony. Now we were in the city some days conferring together. Then on the Sabbath day we were walking outside the gate beside a river where there seemed to be a prayer gathering, and sitting down we were speaking with the women who had assembled. And a certain woman named Lydia, a seller of purple in the city of Thyatira, a worshiper of God, listened. And the Lord opened her heart to be receptive to what Paul was saying. Now notice, we have no idea what Paul was saying. And when she had been baptized with her whole household, so she went home and she said, I have to tell you what I have just heard, and convinced her whole family of what Paul was saying. If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, enter into my house and lodge there. And she convinced us. And then it happened as we were going out to prayer, a certain girl having a spirit of divination met with us. She was a source of great profit to her masters through her divining. Now, there is the reading. So, actually, I read an extra verse because the divining part, which they ultimately condemn, was actually not part of this reading. And so we're seeing this powerful reality of what's actually happening. But notice it's more or less a transitional reading. This is what happened, then this happened, but what was the vision? And this is something we've really got to get to understand. What were they preaching? Now, we have an understanding. They were preaching the gospel. We can see it in Paul's letters. But there's an important line there in Paul's letters to the Romans. It's one of my favorite. And that is from my favorite chapter in Romans, which is Romans 12. I call that the Christian desiderata. If you don't know what the desiderata is, you can look it up. And there's the second verse, which calls us not to be conformed to the world, but to be transformed by the renewal of our mind. So we're to be transformed to have a whole different understanding of the world compared to those who are not transformed. So it's a whole different vision. It's not just a moral vision. And this is something that's a real issue in our church because we've got this group who are really more vocal. They are more vocal than anything else, and but they're not necessarily accurate, who are preaching morality. But nothing wrong with morality. But remember, you can be an atheist and follow Catholic morality. So what is the radical difference there? It is to understand there is a deeper vision. We believe in a bigger reality than we can see. That's what faith is all about. I believe in something bigger than I can see. That's what it's all about. When I sit down to pray, I am I am opening myself up to that bigger vision than what I can see. And I'm opening myself to a bigger sense of reality. And there is where we see St. Paul teaching this. Because remember, he's teaching this, and he's teaching this to people who have one sense of reality, and he's giving them a deeper sense. Now, we don't know what he was literally saying. We have an idea what he was saying because of everything he writes. But remember, and we don't know when this happened, in 2 Corinthians 12, Paul talks about being literally caught up to the third heaven. So Paul was a mystic. He experienced things to a deeper and more powerful level, and he was a good mystic. We have plenty of people online who are bad mystics. Some of them wear the same type of clothes that I do. Be careful of those people. And you can judge whether they are accurate or not by how well they match Catholic teaching, because remember, Catholic teaching is divine revelation. And if they give you stuff that is more than Catholic, so, well, I learned this from speaking to whatever spiritual force they saw, and it contradicts Catholic teaching, then avoid them like a disease. Because, in fact, in a sense, they are a spiritual disease. So be careful of that. So do understand that. This powerful reality, Paul is speaking from these truths, but he was also a mystic. He understood these deeper truths that he was preaching and helping people to understand this reality that was bigger than what we can see. That's what our faith is all about. And that's what we want to understand. And that, of course, as I always say, feeds the morality. Okay, it's not we live this life so that we don't end up in hell. That's not good preaching. We live this life because we understand there is something greater and we want to be in touch with it. And that greater is the embodiment of love. Embodiment isn't even the right term. God, remember, St. Paul said God is love. So it's not that God is the embodiment of love, which Jesus, in fact, is, the incarnation of love, but God is love. He's the source. He is love. Therefore, we get in touch with that which is love. That's a heck of a lot bigger than simply, well, you have to do the right thing, otherwise you're going to end up in hell. That's not the message. The message is get in touch with the truth that is God, and we can find God in Jesus Christ, who is the incarnation, the face of God. If you have seen me, you have seen the Father, Jesus says in John. And we understand that's the truth. God is. So we put all this together and we understand even this little transitional passage. We're seeing the vision of St. Paul and we're seeing what he's saying. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. We're here every single Monday through Friday. Subscribe, like, let people know, and we'll be right back right after this. Did you know that the Catholic Audio Media Podcast is available on various podcast platforms? You can find us, among others, on Podbean, which is our home platform. You can find it on Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeart, among others. Just look for Catholic Audio Media, all one word. On some platforms, such as Spotify, look for Catholic Audio Media, 3 words, and subscribe and listen to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon, patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media, patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer, previews of upcoming podcasts, previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com, your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out, patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back, and we're looking at some of the powerful teaching we've seen, but I also want to look at some of the things that have come out this past week from Pope Leo. And one of the things in a recent statement, he said that we should read, and I guess he mentioned paper books. I'd only disagree with him, and because I read a lot of electronic books, just because it's a lot easier to read an electronic than a paper book. But I read paper books too. It's just because I have a Kindle. And the Kindle allows me to carry my library of books with me. So one of the things I use my Kindle for is in prayer. Now, one of the things I'm doing is I'm reading. As a matter of fact, I have a column coming out on my Substack, catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. This week, based on something that Dennis Prager wrote in his Rational Bible series. It's actually from the Book of Numbers. Well, it's easier for me to look it up on the Kindle instead of carrying around the Rational Bible and everything else in my library. Reminds me when I was in the seminary, because I was in the seminary long before the Kindle existed, obviously. I was in the seminary before the internet became open to the public. Remember, I was using the internet in the Navy, had no idea, back in the late 1970s, but it became open to the public somewhere around 1993, 1994 with AOL. So, and when I was in the seminary, on a windowsill that would lead to and from the chapel, and that was the same windowsill that would basically lead to the refectory, which is basically what we call the cafeteria, and also to our rooms upstairs, were a lot of books I used to store there, so that if I went to the chapel, I could grab a book. And I used to have lots of books there. And that's something that I did because I did and do a lot of spiritual reading. Not as much as I should. One of my biggest, what do you call it? My biggest trials is not, I love Twitter. It's the only social media thing I use except for Substack. We look at this understanding of reading and paper books. Well, this is important. And you might say, well, Father, who am I? I've preached on this last week at the local parishes. I would say, well, who am I? I'm not, not a theologian. Well, you were a baptized Catholic. You were given the same Spirit, the Holy Spirit, that the apostles received. So yeah, you should read. And not just spiritual books, by the way. You could read all kinds of things. You should read, I'm reading a mystery, a short story mystery this morning, which was wonderful, by the way. But in any case, you want to read a lot and get out there. I'm also reading, I read several things at the same time, Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. First thing I've ever read by Charles Dickens. I mentioned in an earlier podcast that we studied it in school and I hated it because that's not the way you should read this. And the more I'm reading this, I'm going, we should have read it for school, but you had to, but that's not the way to read this. It's just to literally read it the way Charles Dickens wanted it to be read, sitting down and read it and the whole bit. And I love it. It's a wonderful story, and he was a wonderful writer. So, but read that material that's out there. Read good spiritual books. Read the lives of the saints. Read the saints, rather, the writings of the saints. I always say it's okay to read the biographies of the saints, but also read the words of the saints themselves. And the reason is because a biography by default is going to be kind of cleaned up, whereas what the saint actually wrote is going to be what they actually said in light of the life they were actually living. Many people get this idea that these saints were perfect. They weren't. They couldn't have been perfect because only Jesus is perfect. And I'm even including in there St. Francis. And remember, many of the saints, after the sacrament of confession was developed, it took time to be developed. It wasn't set up the way we experience it now during the time of the apostles. It actually developed over time, and our current celebration of the sacrament comes from the Irish monks. But you have to realize a large majority of saints, well, no, all the saints, but after the real development of the sacrament of reconciliation, the penance and confession, it's got about 3 names. After the development of it, every single saint went to confession, every one of them. And also, they have their writings. They have their writings as people who were not perfect. That's something to read, some fascinating writing. Some of my favorite stories come from St. Louis de Montfort's books. And he tended to be a little bit fire and brimstone-y, but he had some interesting things to say, which, because of his fire and brimstone way, makes it even deeper. So yeah, the Pope is right to get out there and read books. You don't necessarily, again, one of the things I would disagree with, the only thing I disagree with that statement is paper books. No, read the electronic books too, because they're literally the same. And sometimes you can find some really incredible electronic books. I think you can buy the entire Summa Theologica for 99 cents on Amazon as a Kindle book. I think that was the last I paid for it, because obviously you don't buy that more than once. Do you believe that? That's so. You can find all kinds of books. The latest thing coming out. One of my favorite books ever is New Seeds of Contemplation. I've read that so many times by Thomas Merton. Read good spiritual books. I remember reading, believe it or not, well, you'd probably believe it knowing me, Daniel Berrigan, one of his great books, the Book of Daniel. I remember reading Daniel Berrigan in the seminary. So don't just read the so-called orthodox stuff. Read what's out there from some of the great people who inspire us, and even people you disagree with. Read that. I've read the Bhagavad Gita. Obviously, I'm not a Hindu, but I've read it. Wouldn't necessarily recommend it unless you know your theology, but I've read it, and I can tell you about what I've read, and I want to read the Quran. So you see, the Pope is right. Get out there and read good books and be a good reader along with everything else. And doing that, you really deepen your knowledge and your way of living. We're going to be right back right after this. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Are you feeling overwhelmed, burdened by the challenges of life? Take a moment to find solace in the words of 1 Peter 5.
Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time.
In times of trial, remember the power of humility. Trust in God's timing, for he will lift you up when the time is right.
Cast all your anxiety upon him, because he cares for you.
Release your worries and anxieties unto the Lord, for he cares for you deeply. Find comfort in his loving embrace.
And the God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, after you have suffered a little while, shall himself perfect, establish, and strengthen you.
These are just a few verses from 1 Peter 5, offering you hope, encouragement, and guidance. Tune into the Bible, the source of everlasting wisdom.
Bible verses based on the American Standard Version.
Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out, patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back, and we're going to be talking tomorrow more about the understanding as we see Paul responding to coming from a totally different perspective than the people understood at the time, which is what he was teaching. And remember, he was a mystic. And how do we see it? We see it in his reaction to an event that happened. So we're going to see that tomorrow. If you want to see the event that happened, you can always look up to see what tomorrow's first reading is. Remember, that's what we do here all the time. We look at the first reading generally. Occasionally we look at the gospel reading because everyone sees the gospel. We want to look at the first reading and see what wisdom is there. And by doing that, we have a deeper understanding of the rest of the scriptures that we're all called to know, and all of them point to Christ. So we'll do that tomorrow. Remember to subscribe, to like, and we will see you tomorrow, same time.
Yeah. You know the real is back. Father Carr Chaplain from the city of champions, dropping daily reflections coming straight from the field. The raw truth revealed for the strong-willed. It's the Greatest Act of Defiance podcast with your host Father Carr, a message built to last. The Greatest Act of Defiance podcast. That's right, the Greatest Act of Defiance. Word up. Word up. Word up. Word up.
The Catholic teaching in this podcast is reflected and presented as accurately as possible. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Archdiocese of Boston or any other institution.